In this podcast, we're going to continue to look at Chinese and Korean art, and we're going to start by looking at one of the most amazing architectural complexes called the Forbidden City. And it's literally a city, very expansive, massive. It has 30 feet high walls and over 9,000 rooms. It's the largest Chinese architectural uh, palace complex in existence. Before we do, let's look at some building materials. So in China, there's a use of wood as a principal building material. There are tiled roofs. Now these are actually glazed tile roofs that have sort of a yellow tint to that, and I'm going to tell you about the color significance in just a moment. The walls of the interior protect from the weather. They're not so much as there for building support. Instead, the support comes from the interior wooden columns right here, that they are grooved together rather than nailed. So do you see how these little wooden brackets sort of slide into each other to hold everything in place? It's a corbelled bracketing, so they're woven together. And here's a little diagram of the corbelled arch. So why is this called the Forbidden City? Well, you might guess that it is forbidden. So yes, it is. It's forbidden for anybody except for someone associated with the royal court to enter. And it can actually be divided into sections. So here's a better one. There's the inner court on the top and the outer court on the bottom. The outer court was there for state affairs. Only men had access to these spaces, and this was for religious and state ceremonies, whereas the inner court was really for the royal family and concubines. You were forbidden to enter this inner court, and you could actually die if you did. In fact, you could die if be killed if you entered the Forbidden City and you didn't have access to it. Now, these walls are so high, and there are several gates spread throughout this. In fact, you should write this down, that there are several gates, and these gates are significant because they're there for two reasons. One, it's to keep people in and to keep people out. So just like Versailles, the emperor wanted to keep the people who were, most important to him close and to keep an eye on them, but also to keep people who didn't belong in there out. He wanted to consolidate his power, put it all in one place so that he had control over what was going on. So just a little bit of context. So this building project was started by the Ming Emperor Yongle, and that's Yongle. And he did this to consolidate his power and showcase the magnificence of everything that he could accomplish, particularly after a few turbulent years where he had to overthrow his nephew who wanted power. There was this big power grab, and so this was a big symbol of his strength and ability to conquer his opponents. He sets up this capital in Beijing. Now, the monumental scale of this, you should write this down, the form of it, the large scale of this, symbolizes power, conveying his ability to control in a very geometric, precise formula a large space. You can see how controlled and precise this is. It's divided up into these rectangular and somewhat square-like shapes. Now, this rectangle actually symbolizes Earth, because we also see in Chinese architecture, when we have circular areas, you may guess, that symbolizes the heavens. So we see this absolute power of the emperor controlled through these geometric shapes. Now, the center of it all, there's the Hall of Supreme Harmony, and you can see that there are tiered, 1, 2, 3, there's 3 tiered steps that lead up to this. They're actually quite large. Here they are. Think about in other works of art in which there's a tier, tiered to get to a particular place of importance. So maybe you said the Great Altar of Zeus. Notice you have to walk up a set of stairs. Maybe you said the Apadana at Persepolis. Maybe you said the Parthenon. Not quite you know, the steps, the tiers that we see here at the Forbidden City, but definitely you have to walk up to the place of importance. Now, the number three, traditionally in Chinese culture, the number three is seen as representing unity, the unity of the yin and the yang. And each tier of each structure is set within a staircase with 9 steps, with the number 9 symbolizing the divine power of the emperor. So there's a lot of numerology in this symbolism. Now, the Hall of Supreme Harmony is at the heart of the Forbidden City, so that form symbolizes the content. It's the grandest and most important building in the nation. It's where ceremonies took place, the enthronement ceremonies, and it is the grandest of all of them, and you can see that right here at the center. Now, this entire court, the entire palace, is really, really big. It is said to have 9,999 rooms, and that's, I think that's just a saying, because your Barron's book actually says it has 9,000 rooms. But the saying is that the emperor is not just a ruler, but he's actually the son of the supreme deity. So he's the son of God. And so this makes this his home where he lives. And it's said that the supreme deity lived in the stars in a 10,000 rooms palace, so of course his son would need to have 9,999 rooms, because he couldn't have as much as the god. Now, the design of the whole city is based on a traditional court-style residence in Chinese architecture, and it's based off of 2 different things. One, there's this traditional book, this treatise, you should write this down, on architecture methods on state standards. So it's what's the standard of what a palace should look like, and it's very specific about the particular design of buildings that represent ranks for different people. So your importance determines where you live in this building and how the building is set up. Because there is this really important, this is contextual, Confucian ideology. So in Confucian ideology, all the activities need to be conducted in a manner appropriate to the participants' social and family roles. And everyone must have, upright character, and they should follow their roles as well. So the architecture needs to reflect this sense of hierarchy, and it certainly does. The other thing that it needs to reflect is this idea of heaven and earth, and that the emperor, he controls the earth by having all of these rectangular shapes. There's some other symbolism in the whole city as well. So the dark red, was painted dark red, represents the sun. The yellow roofs represent the earth, and the blue that we see throughout it represents the heavens. These 3 colors is said to correspond with 3 points of the compass, with the white of the marble providing the 4th point of the compass to further symbolize the emperor's power over the entire earth. So all of these colors have symbolic meaning in them. Also, the corners, the 4 corners, point to the 4 corners of the compass: north, east, south, and west. And we've seen that so many times before, haven't we? It's just, we see it all over throughout art history. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the form. So the style of architecture in which this is built is this tower built of many stories, and it's called a pagoda. And it's written right here, pagoda. All right. A pagoda is a tower built of many stories, and each succeeding story is identical in style to the one beneath it, just only smaller. They typically have these dramatically projecting eaves. Do you see how this is moving outward like this? and they curl up at the very ends. Now, the reason that they move out like this are for several reasons. One is to let the light in. You should write that down. Another is to protect from the rain and the elements. So to jut out is a way to protect from the elements. Another thing I've heard is that it's to ward off evil spirits, because evil spirits are said to move in a straight line, and these are curved so the evil spirits bounce off. Okay, oh, I forgot about this. So, there's this beautiful room called the Palace of Tranquility and Longevity, and this is a beautiful room where an empress moved into it, and you can see how gorgeously it's decorated, and this just is just an example of what it looks like in some of its most beautiful places, areas. This particular work of art actually isn't a painting done on canvas, but it's done on silk. So you see a mountain landscape painted with ink on silk, and it's really beautiful, filled with lots of detail. It's hard for you to see in this image. I'll try to get some images up close for you. But first, let me give you a little bit about how the Chinese view the mountains. So from very early times, the Chinese viewed mountains as sacred and imagined them as the house of immortals. Had great respect for these mountains. And during the Song Dynasty, Song, there was this great explosion of landscape painting. And this is the period from which this particular landscape painting comes out of. Now, in Chinese art history, landscapes have a very high ranking place because landscapes actually have lots of symbolism within them, and they tell stories based on the rocks and the trees and the little paths, and they're symbols for different things that happen in life. And we can't go into great detail with this, but you should know that these trees represent virtuous men standing tall amongst the mist. So this is not just, about trees. It's about standing tall even in a rocky landscape. The artist is Fang Quan, and he was a Taoist recluse. He believed that nature was a better teacher than other artists, and he studied the rocks and the trees and the sunlight, and he was the master of light and shade, and you can see how awesome he is at the light and shade here. Imagine you were drawing this. Um, he mastered this light and shade several centuries before other artists in Europe, which is pretty cool. He has this awesome atmospheric perspective down here at the bottom, and like I said again, just hold on, we're going to get close and see how he has this atmospheric perspective. This piece functions as a tribute to nature. It's not about an exact representation. Instead, it's sort of this beauty and this glorification of nature. He wanted to capture the individual elements of nature using the brush and ink on the silk. Now, he uses scale to dramatically heighten the sense of vastness. So you see how large these mountains are, and then how small this is. It might make you think of Cezanne, the way that he plays with the space. This makes it seem quite vast, even though he places them right next to each other. He actually hid his signature among the trees in the lower right corner, which is kind of fun. Now let's see, maybe we can get a better up-close version on Khan Academy. Yeah, no, that's not better. Oh, that's okay. Yeah, I think this is something that would really just be best seen in person. This work also functions as a meditative piece in which we look at it and we feel smallness within the vastness of nature. We have an entry point into the painting at the very bottom, and then maybe at the sides here, but we're really looking up and into it. It is also monochromatic in order to encourage that meditative looking and allowing your eye to wander. It isn't a pure landscape. There are actually, and I know we can't see it, but you're just gonna have to trust me, there are donkeys in this piece, there are two different men, there's a small temple, but we just, that all goes to show that man is small and insignificant in comparison to nature. So that nature dominates this. This is called a mountain water painting. You should write that down, a mountain water painting. This is a particular kind of painting done with ink and water. It's called Chinese water painting. It's a traditional ancient way of painting, and we see that here with Sunam summer trees as well. Now perhaps seeing these trees again after you've now seen the Kwan's piece will give you this better idea of the long history and tradition of painting landscapes, trees, and the way in which Sunam takes the trees and is connecting it to the tradition and the past of Chinese landscape paintings. I mean, this was done in 1000 CE, so it's very old. And this ink and water combo is a traditional Chinese way of painting. Now, this was a hanging scroll as well, so it's not something that's meant to be like hung up with in a what's that called, like a frame. It's meant to be hung on the wall in a scroll-like form. One last thing. So this grand central mountain in the middle, it anchors it to its surroundings, and it relates to the Confucian idea of the natural world and the socio-political order. So this idea of importance and hierarchy is reflected in this landscape. All right, that's it for this podcast. There are a few more works coming in the next podcast.